Some stories are so terrifying they feel like they could only happen in a movie. But what if I told you that one of the most famous horror films of all time, The Exorcist, was inspired by a real-life case? This is the story of Anneliese Michel, a young woman whose life took a horrifying turn, leading to one of the most documented and controversial exorcisms in modern history. Our story begins not with demons, but with a seemingly ordinary, devoutly religious family in Liebelfing, a small town in Bavaria, Germany. Anneliese Michel was born in 1952. She grew up in a strict Catholic household with her parents, Joseph and Anna, and her 3 sisters. From a young age, religion was the cornerstone of their lives. They attended Mass twice a week, and Anneliese was described as a bright, happy, and deeply pious girl. She enjoyed playing the piano and had dreams of becoming a teacher. Her life was, by all accounts, normal. But that all changed in 1968, when Anneliese was just 16 years old. It started subtly. One night, without any warning, her body began to convulse violently. She bit her tongue, and for a few moments, she was completely unresponsive. Her family was terrified, but they didn't know what to make of it. When it happened again, they took her to a doctor. A neurological examination and a hospital found nothing abnormal. Still, the episodes continued. After a particularly severe convulsion, she was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. She was prescribed medication to control the seizures, and for a while, it seemed to work. Anneliese was able to finish high school, and in 1973, she enrolled at the University of Würzburg to become a teacher. It felt like she was getting her life back on track, but the calm didn't last long. While at university, away from the constant support of her family, Anneliese's condition began to worsen in a new and disturbing way. It was no longer just physical seizures. She started experiencing terrifying hallucinations while she prayed. She would see demonic faces, twisted and menacing, mocking her faith. She claimed to hear voices whispering to her, telling her that she was damned and would rot in hell. These were not just fleeting thoughts, they were vivid, tormenting experiences that shook her to her core. The medication she was taking for her epilepsy seemed to have no effect on these new symptoms. In fact, things were getting worse. Anneliese grew increasingly depressed. The constant torment from the voices and visions was overwhelming. She started to avoid religious symbols. She described an aversion to touching a crucifix or drinking holy water from a shrine. On a pilgrimage with a family friend, she was reportedly unable to walk past an image of Jesus and refused to drink from a holy spring, claiming it burned like fire. To her and her family, this was a clear sign that her affliction was not medical. It was spiritual. They became convinced that Anneliese wasn't just sick, she was possessed by a demon. Desperate for answers, the Michel family turned away from medicine and towards the church. They believed that only a spiritual remedy could save their daughter. They began seeking out priests, pleading for an exorcism. However, the Catholic Church in the 20th century was very cautious about approving such a rite. The requirements were strict. The person had to be evaluated by doctors, and all possible medical and psychological explanations had to be ruled out. The priests they spoke to initially dismissed their claims, urging them to continue with medical treatment and to have more faith. They advised Anneliese to pray more, to live a more devout life, but they refused to consider an exorcism. For Anneliese, this was a devastating blow. She felt abandoned by the very institution she had dedicated her life to. As her condition spiraled, her behavior became more and more erratic and frightening. She would growl and bark like a dog, sometimes hiding under tables for days. She ate spiders, flies, and coal. She would lick her own urine off the floor. In fits of rage, she would tear her clothes off her body and perform hundreds of squats a day until she collapsed from exhaustion. The once sweet, pious girl was becoming unrecognizable. Her family watched in horror, feeling helpless. They documented her episodes, hoping the evidence would finally convince the church to intervene. After years of rejection, the family finally found a priest who believed their story. Father Ernst Alt was a local pastor who, after observing Anneliese himself, became convinced she was genuinely possessed. He saw her violent reactions to religious objects and heard the deep, guttural voices that seemed to emanate from her. He began to petition his superiors, writing to Bishop Joseph Stangl of Würzburg and detailing the severity of Anneliese's case. He argued that she met all the criteria for demonic possession, including speaking in languages she had never learned and exhibiting supernatural strength. Finally, in September 1975, after years of pleading, the bishop gave his permission. He authorized Father Arnold Renz, a seasoned exorcist, along with Father Alt, to perform the major exorcism according to the Roman ritual of 1614. The family was relieved. They believed that this was the final battle, the only way to save Anneliese's soul from the forces that had taken control of her body. They had no idea that the real horror was just beginning. The sessions were to take place in secret at the Michel family home. The priests prepared their holy water, their crucifixes, and their prayer books, ready to confront the evil they believed had taken root in this young woman. What followed were 10 months of grueling exorcism rites. From September 1975 to July 1976, Father Renz and Father Alt conducted 1 or 2 sessions every week, each lasting up to 4 hours. They recorded over 40 audio tapes documenting the terrifying ordeal. These tapes would later become crucial evidence, capturing what sounded like a war between the priests and multiple demonic entities. During the rites, Anneliese's voice would change dramatically. She would speak in deep, masculine growls, identifying herself with the names of various demons and damned souls, including Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, Nero, and even a disgraced priest from the 16th century. These voices would argue with the priests, mock them, and blaspheme. They spoke about hell and damnation with terrifying clarity. The entities claimed they were possessing Anneliese as a warning to the modern, godless world. Anneliese herself, in her brief moments of lucidity, seemed to accept her suffering. She told her family and the priests that she was enduring this torment as a penance for the sins of the youth and the apostate priests of the modern church. She believed her suffering had a purpose, a belief that was encouraged by the priests. This conviction led her to a fateful decision. As the exorcisms progressed, Anneliese began to refuse food. She believed that by fasting, she could help weaken the demons' hold on her and help atone for the sins of others. The physical toll of this ordeal was brutal. Already weakened by years of seizures and torment, Anneliese's body began to waste away. The constant physical exertion during the exorcism sessions, thrashing, screaming, and performing endless genuflections left her battered and bruised. Her knees were fractured from the hundreds of daily genuflections she was compelled to perform. She was suffering from severe dehydration and malnutrition. Yet, despite her rapidly deteriorating physical state, her parents and the priests focused solely on the spiritual battle. They were so convinced they were fighting demons that they seemingly ignored the fact that the woman at the center of it all was physically dying. They did not call a doctor. They trusted that God would not let her die. They were tragically mistaken. The details of her final days, the outcome of the exorcisms, and the legal firestorm that followed are even more shocking. The priests, Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, finally received permission from the Bishop of Wurzburg, Joseph Stengel, to perform the great exorcism on Anneliese. The rite was to be conducted in complete secrecy, following the ritual Romanum of the 17th century. The first session took place on September 24, 1975. From this point on, Anneliese's life became a living nightmare, a relentless cycle of harrowing exorcism sessions. For the next 10 months, 1 or 2 sessions were held each week, some lasting up to 4 hours. Anneliese's physical and mental state deteriorated dramatically. She would writhe, scream, and speak in multiple voices, each claiming to be a different demonic entity. The priests recorded over 40 audio tapes of these sessions, documenting what they believed to be a genuine case of demonic possession. On these tapes, Anneliese, or the voices speaking through her, identified several demons, including Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, Nero, and even Adolf Hitler. These entities would taunt the priests, mock religion, and describe their torments in hell. The voices were guttural, deep, and chillingly different from Anneliese's own. She would also exhibit incredible, unnatural strength, sometimes requiring 3 men to hold her down. She thrashed about, breaking furniture, and injuring herself by banging her head against walls or biting herself. Her family watched in horror as their daughter transformed into something unrecognizable. During brief moments of lucidity, Anneliese would be exhausted but coherent. She expressed a deep-seated belief that she was suffering to atone for the sins of others, particularly for wayward priests and the youth of her generation. This conviction seemed to give her a strange sense of purpose amidst the torment. She believed her suffering was a form of penance, a sacrifice she had to make. As the exorcisms continued, Anneliese's physical health plummeted. She stopped eating, convinced that the food was contaminated by the demons. Her body wasted away. She developed pneumonia and a high fever. Her knees became so damaged from constant genuflection, reportedly hundreds of times a day, that the tendons ruptured. She became emaciated, her face gaunt, her eyes hollowed out. Yet, she refused medical intervention, believing that her faith and the exorcism were her only salvation. Her parents, caught between their faith and their daughter's declining health, sided with Anneliese and the priests, trusting that this was a spiritual battle that had to be won. The priests, too, seemed to believe that medical help would interfere with the spiritual process. They were convinced they were fighting a war against evil itself, and Anneliese was the battlefield. They documented her stigmata-like wounds and her visions of the Virgin Mary, which further solidified their belief that this was a holy struggle. Anneliese reportedly told them that the Virgin Mary had appeared to her, offering a choice: be freed from the demons immediately or continue her suffering to show the world the reality of demonic possession and save souls. Anneliese, in her devout state, chose the latter. The final exorcism session took place on June 30th, 1976. Anneliese was incredibly weak, suffering from a high fever and severe dehydration. She was barely able to speak. Her last recorded words to the priests were, "Beg for absolution." To her mother, she whispered, "Mother, I'm afraid." That night, Anneliese Michel died in her sleep. She was just 23 years old and weighed a mere 68 pounds. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. But for her family and the priests, she was a martyr who had sacrificed herself in the fight against evil. The story, however, was far from over. The German authorities launched an investigation, and what followed was a trial that would capture the world's attention. In 1978, 2 years after Anneliese's death, her parents, Anna and Joseph Michel, along with priests Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, were put on trial. They were charged with negligent homicide. The prosecution argued that Anneliese was not possessed, but was suffering from a severe psychiatric illness, likely a combination of epilepsy and psychosis. They contended that if she had been forced to receive medical treatment, she would still be alive. The defense, on the other hand, played the chilling audio tapes from the exorcisms in the courtroom. They argued that Anneliese's condition was beyond the scope of medical science, and that they had acted in accordance with her own wishes and their religious beliefs. The case ignited a fierce debate between science and religion, medicine and faith. Was Anneliese a victim of demonic possession or a victim of religious fanaticism and medical neglect? The court was faced with an unprecedented dilemma. Medical experts testified that Anneliese's behavior could be explained by her known temporal lobe epilepsy, combined with religious hysteria and psychological suggestion. They claimed the exorcisms themselves exacerbated her condition, reinforcing her belief that she was possessed and leading to a psychosomatic downward spiral. Ultimately, the court found all four defendants, the parents and the 2 priests, guilty of negligent homicide. They were sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was suspended, and 3 years of probation. The verdict was seen as a compromise. While it held them responsible for failing to provide medical care, the life sentence acknowledged the complex and tragic circumstances of the case. The court essentially concluded that Anneliese's life could have been saved. Anneliese Michel's body was initially buried in a simple grave, but as her story spread, her grave became a pilgrimage site for some who believed her to be an unofficial saint. Her body was later exhumed to be placed in a new coffin, but this only fueled conspiracy theories that her body had not decayed, a supposed sign of sainthood. The church, however, has never officially recognized her as such. The case of Anneliese Michel remains one of the most disturbing and controversial stories of the 20th century. It forced a re-examination of the practice of exorcism within the Catholic Church, leading to stricter guidelines. It raises profound questions that still linger today. Was Anneliese a mentally ill young woman who was tragically failed by both her family and the church? Or was she a devout soul locked in a genuine, terrifying battle with demonic forces? A battle she ultimately lost, or perhaps, in her own way, won. The audio tapes, the court documents, and the eyewitness accounts paint a portrait of immense suffering. Regardless of what one believes, the story of Anneliese Michel is a heartbreaking tragedy about a young woman whose faith, illness, and the actions of those around her led to a terrifying and premature end. Her life serves as a somber reminder of the dark and complex intersections of faith, mental health, and human belief. A huge shout out and thank you to all of my subscribers for your incredible support. It means the world to me, and if you're new here, I hope you'll join our community. Thank you for watching Ghosttery. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the unknown. See you next time.